America's Electric Nazca, Megalithic Marfa, Texas, by myself, Dan Hoquist. It's now available at Amazon and Kindle. It's a journey that starts in the UK at Stonehenge itself, where I found, following the solstice and equinox paths, to be what the ancients followed. The true paths of the ancients connect with the Americas through Newfoundland, Ohio River Valley, Texas, Mexico City, Baja, and that's just the equinox line. The solstice line is just as important for the people of Europe because that's apparently how the giants traveled, and that's Marfa, Texas there. And I'm showing how the solstice path, actually this is the equinox path, connects exactly with the altar of Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. Now we're into the Marfa area, and as I zoom in, you'll see that Marfa, Alpine, and Fort Davis form almost an isosceles triangle. But the most important area, it's got to be the Marfa Plateau itself. You can see there's discoloration of soil in regular patterns everywhere though. Now I started in Alpine, and this is the flight path I took. Coming down, and that was part 1, part 2, coming back up and down. And then we're going to be coming back up from the very bottom up into the Marfa Plateau proper area. And we'll end up there close to the highway that connects Marfa and Alpine, Texas. There are at least 4 kinds of lines found on the Marfa Plateau. The dark lines embedded in soil, some used as fence line markers. Vast majority are not. I think they're connectors and timers. The road type lines all have the same width cut through quartz deposits, apparently without explosives. And then the scratch type lines, they could easily be dismissed, but upon examination, they're really internal in the geoglyphs themselves. And this is a picture of the raised lines, and they're probably the most interesting because there's probably something under the soil, and you can see it just doesn't look like anything when you're standing looking down it. And this is an interesting geoglyph I found. It has almost Mayan waves. They're very stylized. That's why I say Mayan. And when I switch it off, you can see that just the lines were followed. This is a really fun geoglyph to do. And this is right in the side of the cliffs of the plateaus. And you can see the plateau in the upper middle. And this is where we start, where we ended in part 2, going over this beautiful structure into the Marfa Plateau itself. You can see these lines are really apparent, and I'm going to show you several pictures. They'll pretty much look like the same thing, but it's actually several different pictures that are it's showing basically the distinct size of the Marfa Plateau area itself. And they're all tied to water functions upon further examination. And the lines are just incredibly long. You can see them out in the distance. And we get a little bit of a helicopter dome glare in some of the pictures here, because we're traveling up away from the sun. But you can see the vast majority of the dark lines, they're easy to see and they're not fences. Although a lot of property owners have used those as markers because they're very straight and very easy to set a fence to. But these road lines are just as interesting, and you can see that that particular one is like a secondary or an earlier straight line that was rerouted for some reason, but they're all the same width, and you can see there's been no travel down it. They had to be machined, and they're all tied to water functions. And the brighter the road area, I believe the more quartz deposit that would make it very bright if illuminated from underneath. And I think the dark lines are just connectors, and you can see that you know, the wavy part of it is because it's used for fence lines. Some of it's been destroyed, but when you pull out, it continues going. Some of this stuff you just have to be far enough away from to actually see and make sense of. And this just shows the really stark vastness of this plateau area. I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see some posts, but there's no fence there. The cattle are roaming freely. They're on both sides, you see. So there's actually no fence there, but it's a nice dark line, isn't it? Really, really straight. A lot of these are not, these geoglyphs are not made of the dark line, so the vast majority are made of road lines, raised lines, and scratch lines. So anybody who thinks that this is all fencing or something, this is just what is visible without highlighting. And it's all tied to water functions. So I have to think that it's because of an electric aquifer. And I wanted to remind you that this area is historically a minimal construction area. That's what it says in the history books. And there's just a beautiful scenery right there. It looks like something out of a primitive world science fiction movie or something. And that looks like a sphinx, to tell you the truth. And obviously I have my own opinions about this area because I believe that the connection from the Great Pyramid is depicted on the plateau in geoglyphs. And I'm just showing a variety and assortment of lines. And there's a line with arrow markers. I know that people will say, oh, they're turnoffs. Well, then it would be on both sides of the road. So it's not. It's meant for people to follow a certain direction by eyesight when you're at altitude. It takes you from geoglyph area to geoglyph area. And sometimes you just have to be far enough away to really get a respect for what is going on here. I really needed about 2,000 foot more in altitude. And I wanted to remind you guys that the Marfa Plateau is almost exactly the same height as Machu Picchu, which is very, very strange in itself. If you go in a helicopter, you can only get up to about 10,000 feet, and although it's great for research, uh, you can't really get a respect for the full size of the geoglyphs unless you can get up to about 15,000 foot. And you can see that there's just no vegetation on the plateau. It's very, very well maintained. And there's markings that tell me that there's been some kind of texturing or machinery. You see off in the distance, the upper left, that's where we're going. But first, we come across a small outcrop. There's a water function down below. But when you see that from a couple of thousand feet more, it's an eyeball. And no, that's not the matriarch. Now this is an example of the scratch lines that I was telling you about. It's a solar ray setup with tied to the water function, but almost fully done with scratch lines. And they're wavery. And yes, they could be done by Indians. But you see the exactness of the roads would call for some kind of survey. And the white areas are just a higher quartz area. You'll see that the plateau is very, very well outlined. Way off in the distance, there's stables. Because they're not attached to any reservoir area. They have to be terraforming stables, I believe. And then you get sometimes these great lines cut into the plateau itself that show cliff face area type and almost entrances into the plateau. So there are caves all over the place. There's something going on underneath the plateau itself. And you can see how hard the soil is itself. That's a clay quartz mixture. In order to get a road through that, you need machinery. Dynamite. Something that will cut rock. Or perhaps they just knew how to work rock a lot better than we do. And from everything that I could research, they love quartz. All different kinds of colors. And you can see the mosaic style where the soil actually changes color right at the line. And that's why I say it's a mosaic, like a tile work. And I don't know how they colored the ground there. I figure it's something like in Nazca where they actually just had the top layer covered with a darker material. I'm not real sure though. I couldn't get out there and do any soil samples. And there you see staples again, water function. And this is where we're headed. Off in the distance there, I just wanted to show you the lines. This is the matriarch's eye. And you can tell because of the outline of the eye is very, very unique. And there are other lines that show hair, different possibly things this figure is supposed to be wearing, headdress, etc. And it includes great, huge amounts of geo work, rock. And there you see, these are actually raised lines that look like hair follicles. And then, of course, the road type line cut right through a quartz deposit. And there's very unique things about this mound itself. tied to the water function. And as we swing around, getting a more solstice oriented position, that is more of a northeast bearing, you can easily see that this was intended, all these lines were intended to bring attention to this area. But then you start to see close up that this mound actually has some carving on it itself. And it may even have lines on it meant to connect it for visual attitude. And there I close up some of the lines. You can see that they're raised lines. And like I said, they're not used for roads or anything like anything of the nature. But they seem to have some of the darker lining areas below, sometimes to emphasize the line itself. And this is, again, very, very hard soil. And you can see the gracefulness of the hills in the direct area too. And if you look closely at the mound, it appears to have an eyelid. And you can see that when I zoom out a little bit. But it also has this weird little eye effect too. And you can see this is all supposed to be like eyelash or makeup or something of that nature. And when you see it from a couple of thousand feet higher, it actually becomes like a female pharaoh. And I call it the matriarch. I actually think it might be a representation of Isis herself. And I'm sorry, but there are just not enough Indians in North America to do this work. This looks like it was carved intentionally from the mountains. The plateau leveled artificially. The colors applied. The connectors made, connecting the aquifer itself. It's intricate work. I mean, and there's so much of it. This is not something in the nature of a pyramid set. This is more in the nature of some kind of an electric show or a light show, probably meant to actually be seen from altitude on a dark planet. And it's caused from an acidic aquifer. Yes, again, if you can find YouTube of causing an electrical spark with lemon. I believe the video would be lighting a fire with lemon. And you can actually wire anything acidic to create electricity. And that's that original mound that I was showing you in the first place. Looking back at it, connective area with water function. And you can see that the geoglyph itself is not really made of these dark lines. They're more used for outlines, but they use the road lines, and you can clearly see the carven aspect to this eye mound. And I really think this is just a massive, beautiful work. I just have to wonder what's under the raised lines to keep them in a raised position like that. It must be some piping or cabling. and you can see that the eye itself is carved separately from the eyelid to be seen in a certain orientation from altitude. And that's the eye itself with the hair and whatnot. I find this an incredible validation of what I saw on Google Earth in the first place. So we have another validation photographically that the Marfa lines are indeed there. Their association with the Marfa lights must be made. And the fact that either nobody knows of them, and that's a connective area where somebody lives, again tied to a water function. I think that people might have been aware of this place, but kept it hidden from the public, and there you see a line that comes right up over the cliff, just as if it didn't exist. This is not normal human construction. And there's some stapled areas. Again, that's flat land. That's not a creek bed or anything like that. It's not a reservoir. And you can see the sculpted areas. And the raised lines underneath are simply for decoration. To accentuate some kind of a, maybe an eyelid or an eye hair of some sort. Just stylized. But these dark lines are the easiest ones to see. If you zoom into Google Earth, you're going to find those first. Much of these the road lines, the geoglyphs, they don't make sense until you highlight the lines. And that tells me that this was a light show also. Besides the fact that I found that the Chinese figured out how to light their lines, and then and this is one of the cut areas in the plateau, just like someone cut it, and if you look, there's just caves galore in there. It'd be a great area to go exploring in as a young person. And I hope that this gives some people some ideas. Get out there and look around. But you can see that these road lines, they go through areas that normally humans would blow up. And the dark lines themselves go over the ridges, valleys, and everything is tied to water functions. And those mounds that look like eyes, well, they are when viewed from the proper altitude and orientation. Again, caves galore. It would be an incredible undertaking to actively survey this area, and I think that might be another issue that's hampering the progress of research out there, because obviously there's nothing, no history that accounts for these lines, roads, raised lines, nothing. And much of it looks artificial. These lines stretch for miles and miles, at least as long as anything in Nazca. And there you see an actual reservoir, but it looks like something metallic is actually holding that area. And a connective area with no entrance, no fencing, in some of the hardest substance I've ever been around. This is really hard land. No real loose soil to be found in the area. Road lines, dark lines, outlines. And if you'll notice, the one that goes up into the mountains keeps going. Hill Valley doesn't matter. They like to make everything very visually artistic. Another connective area with no entrance, no exit, and a water function, and all the lines tied to it. Miles and miles. Just incredibly straight lines. Again, historically, minimal construction. That's what it says. That's what the book says. There were only a couple of years during World War II that they were active, and this is why. This is the airport that used to be the airfield for Marfa during the war. And this is my request for information about this airport, the building and decommissioning of it, which they wouldn't give me because they said it wasn't there. Fortunately, I got the airport makeup and designations, numbers, and I got the longitude, latitude, because right after I filed for Freedom of Information, this area was changed on Google Earth, and this is why I think they were hiding it, because it looked like a great Star of David. And this we'll get into in the next video as we come back down into the main plateau area of Marfa. And there was a lot of this I don't think they were willing to destroy out of respect for the Jewish religion, but they didn't want it to be a target for World War II Germany, I guess. That's all I can figure. The lines look older than the construction. And back to the matriarch. Obviously, I'm wrong about some of the lines, but it's a very, very, very distinct face when you color enhance it and contrast. And I believe it's all meant to light up as a dedication to ISIS. Thank you for your view.